I thought today I'd do a different video. I've been asked by the guys at the Broadside Empires of Steel game to show off their app or test out their apps that they've made for the game and show it off to you guys. So I thought I would do that right now and take some time just to explain it a little bit and to give my thoughts on it. Um, to do that, I'm going to be designing a 600 point fleet list just to show how easy this app is to use. Now, we all have cell phones, or at least most of us have cell phones. We all know how to use apps. We all know what they are. If you've played any other kind of competitive game like 40K, they now have an app, and it's just an easy way of selecting the fleets and browsing the stats on certain ships. If you've seen my other videos, you'll know that I went through the Royal Navy and the High Seas Fleet in detail, their cards. And this app will do that for you. Essentially, you don't need to have those cards anymore. You can just have this app on your phone and go through the fleet lists and look at the ship stats from there. So essentially, I think this is like a beta of the app. Their current Kickstarter has this app in it as a stretch goal, which I think it's already passed. It's coming, so it's already passed its funding. And I thought, you know what? Yeah, I'll give it a shot. I'll take a second and go through it with you guys. Now, word of warning, I've tried to do this video now 3 times. The first time I thought a fairly good job, but the file was corrupted, so I lost everything. The second time I did it, my microphone died, and I blabbed on like an idiot for about 20 minutes before I realized it didn't record anything. So I am recording this on probably the oldest microphone you could think of. So if the sound is a little off and this isn't up to the quality you would expect from a YouTube video, I really, really apologize. But if you want to just mute my voice, if it's that annoying, by all means, I don't hold that against you. But maybe you'll get some good information from this as we go through. Okay, so the thought of which nation to do the 600 point list from, I really want to do Russia because I enjoy the Russian ships. I enjoy their playstyle. But I'm not confident that I'm going to be able to pronounce the names of the ship correctly on a YouTube video. So I'm not going to embarrass myself by doing that. I'm not going to embarrass myself by doing Austria-Hungary or Italy. Now I could do the United States, but I actually, to be honest, I haven't played the United States a lot. I have all the ships painted, and they're beautiful models, but I haven't played them in a battle yet. So I think what I will do is it'll be easier to pronounce and easier for, I think, the audience, you guys, to understand. If you understand World War One naval, you're probably going to know all of the World War One Royal Navy battleships and cruisers. So we're going to do a 600 point list from the Royal Navy. Now this is just an app. This looks like how the app shows up on my phone. Earlier today, it looked a little different on my desktop computer, but I'm currently on my laptop. But anyway, click on here. Once you click on the Royal Navy, it's going to load up all the ships. But the first thing it's going to ask you to do is to choose a flagship. Now this is important for many reasons. First, when you set a points value, let's say 400 points, 600 points, 800 points, 1,000, your flagship is probably going to be the bulk of those points, or you're going to want a good one. But for 600 points, I never recommend going with any of the big ships like the Revenge and the Queen Elizabeth. If we just take a quick look here, you see Ramillies, Revenge, Resolution. When you click on the little name here, it'll show the stat. Here's Ramillies. Excellent primary, excellent secondary. It's got a useful torpedo with a torpedo room so you can reload them. They're not a one-shot, but it's 244 points. I mean, if you're playing a 600 point game, there's almost half your points. And the same is true with the Queen Elizabeth. If I click on Queen Elizabeth here, let's click on Barham. There's Barham down there. If you go with these ships, of course, you're going to get an excellent broadside for your primary batteries. You're going to get great hull integrity and some excellent protection value. But really, you're almost at 300 points. There's just really no point in... If you're at an 800 point or a 1,000 point game, one of those two you should probably go with. And then you get to your middle class of battleships. The Iron Duke, for instance. You see Emperor of India, Iron Duke, Marlborough, and the King George V, which are very close to the Iron Duke. There's not a whole lot between them, but you can see the points value, they're over 200 points. I recommend, but it's only my opinion, that you go with something a little cheaper for your flagship. And in this case, I'm going to go with the Orion class. And I'm going to choose the Orion modified 1917 version. The reason being is it's only a point cheaper, but I could really use that point later on in the game. So first thing you ought to do, choose your flagship. And I recommend an Orion. So I'm going to choose the Orion. Hit the little add button there. And if I go down here, here's Orion. He's part of my flagship and my battle squadron. Also, if you see right here, you'll see battle cruiser, armored cruiser. You see these little flags? On the bottom of the screen or on this app, you can see those flags. So as you start adding ships, it'll tell you at a glance how many of each you have. And down on the bottom right, you'll see that I have 196 out of 400 points. Now, I'm choosing a 600 point list, but don't worry, this will change to 600 points once I go over 400. And that's what we'll work on. So, my flagship is chosen. Now I can add any battleships I want. I recommend at this point that you probably don't choose another battleship, because I've found it's much easier to fit a battleship in at the end than it is at the beginning. Instead, what I want my support fleet fleshed out. Now, in a battle squadron, which is the kind of the fleet list that I'm going to be using here, in the fleet book, in the list, the actual paper version of the lists, you can have a battle squadron, a heavy reconnaissance squadron, an armored squadron. You can have these types of lists, but you have to have a certain amount of each kind of ship. So for a battle squadron, I like to fill out the mandatory ships first. Kind of like if you are familiar with 40K, how you have to have an HQ and then troops. That's essentially what I'm doing. I've selected my HQ, which is the HMS Orion, and now I'm going to do my troops, essentially. And for troops, there's nothing better than light cruisers. Now I have to have one light cruiser squadron of between 1 and 3 cruisers. And that's what I will do. I will choose a few cruisers. Now the Royal Navy have some excellent cruisers, some excellent ones. The Ceres class up here for 68 points. Pretty pricey, but these are excellent cruisers. They're a match or more than a match for even the most advanced German cruisers that you're going to find. So if you're playing another player who's playing the High Seas Fleet, if you take any one of these, the C class, so you have the Ceres or the Caledon, you're going to probably be... He can bring the best cruiser he has, and you're still going to be more than a match for him. So the Ceres is 68 points, the Caledon is 67 points. I know it's going to sound funny, but I always go for the Caledon because I might need that extra point in the end. So let's choose a Caledon class. So here we have him down here. You see the Caledon. He's got a broadside of 5 in the primary. This cruiser is basically a destroyer killer. So it can hunt down destroyers and just do a lot of damage to them. It's also fairly maneuverable. Protection isn't the best, but it's got some really nice 4 dice for broadside and 7 yield. So if you get 2 hits, you're rolling, 14 dice? But yeah, so you'll see here, battle squadron, got my flagship, my screening ships. I've got my first light cruiser, and now we're going to go looking for a second light cruiser. I could go with the Caledon again, but let's see. I don't want the points to go crazy here on cruisers. I just want something that will kill destroyers. And I think I'll go with a Caroline class. Now, why did I skip these ones, the Aurora and the Galatea? Only because 43 points, 42 points. I'm always trying to save even single points wherever I can. So I'm going to go with the HMS Caroline. I'm going to add him. Come down here, you'll see the stats. Another excellent destroyer killer. Some very chunky torpedoes, in case it comes up against something that I can't handle. And down here, you'll see that I have, along with my flagship, I have my light cruiser, my screening ships, essentially my light cruiser squadron of 2 light cruisers, HMS Caledon, HMS Caroline. And now I'm at 305 points out of the 600. So I've more than half of my points are in these 3 ships. Now I have to think, I have my HQ and my troops. Now what kind of battle do I want to fight? I think what I'll do is I'll add an armored cruiser. And I know in the Battle of Jutland, these armored cruisers didn't fare so well, but they actually aren't that bad. I don't think there's anything really wrong with the armored cruisers in this game. Sure, if they come up against a dreadnought, they're going to get hammered. But they also, you shouldn't, as a player, be using them to target dreadnoughts or to go up toe-to-toe opposing dreadnoughts. But what they are really good for is killing light cruisers. They can shred light cruisers. So if the German player or the American player or your opposing player, he brings a couple of light cruisers, you just start chasing them down with these armored cruisers, and they're going to run. So if I go back down here to my list, I have a flagship because I need to have one, and it's a fairly affordable one at 196 points. I have 2 light cruisers, which are going to go hunting for destroyers and torpedo boats. And now I have an armored cruiser that's going to go hunting or chasing down light cruisers. So let's see. You have the Minotaur in defense. You have the Minotaur class, you have the Warrior class. What I think I'll do is I will buy, let's see here, what about the defense? I always like the defense in the Minotaur class, because if I go down here to their stats, they got some excellent primary, secondary, and tertiary guns. So they can chuck out some shots against heavily armored targets. They're decent at taking out light cruisers, and they're also not that bad at taking out destroyers. But 77 points. Let's put a hold on that for a second, and instead what I'll do is I'll check my destroyers. Now, for destroyers, you've got lots. You've got the Admiralty 5 class, all the V's, Vancouver, but they're 48 points. They're essentially light cruisers. They're excellent. Like if I just click on the Vancouver here, they're excellent. Like they're gonna chuck a lot of torpedoes in the water, and that's what you're paying for. They got excellent speed, acceleration is excellent, and their guns actually aren't that bad. They will damage other destroyers, no problem. They'll damage light cruisers, no problem. But I'm not paying 48 points. I can't afford that at 600 points. If I was paying 1,000 points, maybe. And the same goes for the Admiralty M class, 46 points again. Like just click on the Murray here, we go down, we look at his stats. The torpedoes are the same, the maneuverability and acceleration is the same, but the broadside's a little less. But I can't afford, essentially, at 600 points, these expensive destroyers. Instead, I'm going to go for the cheapest chips Beagle class. So at 23 points, I can afford to have a few of these. And why would I want to have a lot of cheap destroyers than a couple of expensive ones? Mainly because I hope the opposing player is going to say, well, those destroyers aren't that much of a risk, and allow them to get up the board and chuck whatever torpedoes they have in the water. So I'm going to use my destroyers as a kind of a, you got to deal with them. If they're coming towards you at high speed, you're going to have to deal with them. If you ignore them, they are going to throw some torpedoes in the water, and you're going to get hit. If you choose to deal with them, it'll take you a turn or two to get rid of them, but in that turn or two, you'll have ignored some of my bigger ships. So at 23 points, we can afford a few of them. So that's what we're going to do. If I just click on the Beagle here and I go down and look at its stats so you can just see it, you can see that its torpedoes are subpar compared to the previous ones. Only 2, 12 range, and 5 yield. So Most of the others are 7s and 4s, 4 broadside, 7 yield. It's okay. They're cheap. I can have 2 of these for every single one of the other ones. So you could think of it kind of like 2 of these are broadside 4, yield 10 for the same price or just a little bit cheaper. Now they are a little slower, they're a little slower, but I think that's not a bad idea. So I'm going to have the Beagle. I'm going to hit the plus button there to get the Beagle. I'm going to get another one. I'll get the Bulldog, and I'll get one more. I'll get the Foxhound. Three pretty cool names. So here's my battle squadron. My flagship with the Orion. My screening ships are the Caledon and the Caroline. And then I've got my 3 destroyers. Now what I'll do now is I'll choose, because I'm getting close to 600 points. I don't have a lot of room left. What I will do is I will choose now, because I know what kind of room I have. I have, what's that? I have 26. I have 226 points to choose between a ship or 2. I do really want an armored cruiser, because they are really good at shredding light cruisers. But what I think I'll do is I'll give my battleship line something else. Now, because I chose an Orion as my flagship, I can't choose any of the other classes of battleship or dreadnought higher than them, because your highest ship has to be your flagship. So what I will do is I will choose a Colossus. And to be quite honest, the Colossus, if you see here, the Orion is 197. The Colossus is 149 points, so quite a bit cheaper. And to be fair, if I just look at its stats down here, it's not a bad ship. Its speed is average, acceleration is average, turning angle is all average, the hull is average, protection is decent at a 1 protection. It's got a fairly good primary broadside and a fairly good secondary. So if I add the Colossus, put the plus button there, if I add the Colossus, now my fleet's starting to look a little bigger. I have my flagship and my battleship. So you have the HMS Orion and the HMS Colossus. That's 2 fairly decent battleships. They're not the cream of the crop of the Royal Navy, but I bet you if you're playing the high seas fleet like the Germans, these 2 ships are going to be a match for whatever the German player throws back at you. Now, if the German player decides to go with the Baden or the Bayern or one of the fancy battle cruisers, sure, they're going to outgun you. But their secondary ship is probably not going to be as fancy. And even if it is as fancy as the first one, then they're not going to have the cool light cruisers. They're not going to be able to have afforded the really cool screening ships. So we have 2 fairly advanced light cruisers. We got kind of crappy destroyers, but we have a lot of them. And we have 2 decent battleships. Now, I still want to get that armored cruiser, because I think using a battleship or a destroyer to attack or take care of enemy light cruisers is sort of a waste. You're not using them to their strengths. Whereas an armored cruiser, an armored cruiser will shred light cruisers. And I think because we have 77 points left, we're going to go for the cream of the crop of the armored cruisers. We're going to go for the Minotaur. So go down here, we see the Minotaur. It's capable of taking out capital ships while damaging them. It's more than capable of shredding light cruisers, and if a destroyer gets too close, it's going to damage it. So here is my 600 points of Royal Navy in the battle squadron. Now remember, this is a battle squadron. You can get a heavy reconnaissance squadron, which is essentially battle cruisers, and the flagship and the mandatory screening ships are a little different, so you can't have exactly the same layout. But this is just an example. This is what the Royal Navy squadron is going to look like. The HMS Orion, the HMS Colossus, the HMS Minotaur, the Caledon, the Caroline, and 3 Beagle destroyers. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 ships. Now, 8 ships in this game for 600 points is actually pretty good. We could have gone all nutso and had only 1 battleship and had the Queen Elizabeth there, but that Queen Elizabeth in a 600 point game is going to get targeted by every German or American ship or an Italian ship or whatever, it's going to get targeted by every ship on the map. And you're probably not going to get 2 or 3 turns out of it before it's extremely damaged or sunk. Whereas if you just decide to compromise and say, you know what, I don't need the Ferrari, the Chevy is enough for me, but I have 2 Chevys. This is what you go with. You go with the Orion. I don't even think I've played a game of this where the Orion wasn't my flagship. There might have been 1 or 2, but I think the other 50 games I played of this, the Orion has been the one, just because the way the point system works in this game for the Royal Navy, I always seem to be able to get right on 600 points. Whereas if I choose any other capital ship, I'm over a point, or I'm under a point, or even 2 or 3 points. And in this game, every single point matters. So it's really satisfying to have a 600 point fleet in a 600 point list. And with 8 activations, don't remember, this is an alternate activation game. With 8 activations, I just don't think, unless the German player is taking the chaff of his list, that he is going to be able to out-activate you. I just don't see it happening. And remember, these 2 ships, the Orion and the Colossus, they're not bad ships. They're a match to anything the Germans can field up until 1916, 1917. So if they're taking any of the normal ships, they're the same. The armored cruiser, although history has told us that these armored cruisers didn't perform very well, before the First World War, these armored cruisers, all the other navies in the world took them seriously. Now, if you're the HMS Dresden in the Indian Ocean, and all of a sudden the HMS Minotaur comes out of nowhere and surprises you, you might be able to outrun it, but the chances are, if it's in range, if the Minotaur is in range of you, it's going to absolutely annihilate the Dresden. And in this game, because you're on a 6x4 playing field or a mat, the Dresden's not going to be able to sail forever. Sure, it can go faster than him, but the Minotaur is just going to absolutely crush light cruisers. And I'm really happy to have it in the list, because there's nothing more annoying than using your heavy battleships to target light cruisers. It's really not recommended. They'll definitely be able to do it, but let the Minotaur. This is like a sort of a predator in the water, whereas the 2 battleships are sort of like your fortress islands. The Minotaur is kind of like your predator. It's just going to go hunt down all kinds of stuff. And its stats, we've seen its stats before right here. It can, any torpedo boat or destroyer that tries to get near it, they're going to suffer as well. So it's good for most things. It's kind of a jack of all trades. And then we get our light cruisers. We spent almost 100 points of our 600 points on 2 light cruisers, but these light cruisers are excellent. They're excellent. A broadside of 4 torpedoes with 7 yield each. If they all hit, I'm not saying they would all hit, but if they all hit, it's going to absolutely crush a battleship. And with its light guns, a broadside of 5, it's also going to be able to shred destroyers. The Caroline is much the same. It doesn't have as many broadside torpedoes, like it only has 2 instead of the 4, but the stats for everything else are basically the same, and it's going to be able to, chug along with the Caledon and throw at the dice. And then we have our measly little destroyers here. But don't let the 23-point destroyer throw you off your game. There's probably in 600 points, the German player or the other player, he's probably not going to be able to, unless he's the Austrians with their super cheap destroyers, he's not going to be able to have more than 4 destroyers on the whole table for 600 points and have any point value for anything else. So let's say he takes like a half-decent battleship or 2, he's only going to have up to 3 destroyers as well. And if he just decides to go with the expensive ones, you're going to have more than him. And what I say is 3 destroyers of the same class, the HMS Beagle class. That's basically, if everything goes okay for you and the luck's on your side, you're going to have a broadside of 6 and a yield of 15. That's going to scare the pants off of any battleship, any dreadnought, seeing these 3 things chugging along at you. And in my experience from this game, I send 3 in, I send 1 out front, and I kind of stagger them, 1 out front, another one an inch or two behind, an inch or two behind that, and I just say, there's a battleship over there, point them in that direction, and they just go. They just head straight there. And I force that battleship to fire at them. You want to live? In 3 turns, I'm going to be there, or 2 turns, I'm going to be right on your ass, and you're going down. I'm going to chuck some torpedoes at you. They may not be the best torpedoes, but they're going to do some serious damage. And the enemy player has to deal with them. He just has to. So why should I pay 48, 50 points for a destroyer when 3 23-point destroyers will do the same? They're gonna have the same fear factor, and you might be able to shoot 2 or 3 of them, or sorry, 1 or 2 of them, but the third one's going to get there. And in that time, the Orion and the Colossus are just going to be shooting away every turn. Old reliables, 10 dice, 10 dice, 10 dice. It's decent. And then you have the Minotaur protecting the 2 battleships from any oncoming light German cruisers or American cruisers or whatever the player is. I think it's a pretty decent list. It's 600 points, and that's the app. It's pretty cool. I'm really impressed. I've played this game a lot, and having to go through the book and flip back and forth, this just makes it so much easier. One of the things that when I first seen this app that I had trouble remembering was the battle flags for these, or the flags for these ships. You'll see how the battleships have these 2 looks like K's, but it's these 2 flags, and the battlecruiser has one of them and another one. If you go down here, it'll show you at the very bottom how many of each ship type you have. So 2 battleships, 1 armored cruiser, 2 light cruisers, and 3 destroyers. And I think that's just a neat thematic thing to have. But anyway, that's it. This is the app for Broadside Empires of Steel. I don't know if it's available to download now, or if it's part of when the Kickstarter ends, the backers will get a chance to take a crack at it. But if the Kickstarter hasn't ended, because again, this is supposed to be done a couple of days ago, but I've had huge technical issues. I feel like a caveman beating rocks together when it comes to computers. But go check out this game. I can't recommend it enough. Sure, it's a beer and pretzels game, but there's nothing wrong with that. It's got some depth to it. And you know what? I want my games to end. When I go sit down with a buddy and I play a game, I hate getting back in my car at 1:30 in the morning and driving home, and the game didn't even end. What's even worse is if you go and sit down with a buddy, and because you know how people, they chat. I chat. Hell, I'm at a buddy's house for like 6-7 hours, and I talk for 5 of those hours. We barely do anything. I love games that end in a reasonable amount of time, and they're fun and they're thematic, and you get to push things around. And this is that game. And they have an app now. So I just have this on my phone, and I just make a list. I play a game for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and I go home. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Sorry about the audio. Essentially, I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, bye for now.